The village pub was no place for a woman. Yes, our wives and daughters would occasionally cross the threshold of our sanctuary to drag us back to our duties, but none of them ever sat down for a drink. There were no written rules, but there was an understanding. The pub was under the dominion of the village men. It is because of this unwritten rule that we stared at her. The sword she had sheathed across her back only intensified our curiosity. She rode in shortly after sunset, her boots heavy with snow and her step filled with purpose. Without looking at our table, she sat down at the bar and ordered a shot of Palenka. The barkeep laughed and offered her a soda, but his demeanor quickly changed. She might have given him a look that the rest of us were not privy to, but most likely the barkeep simply noticed the hilt of her sword. Without a second word, he poured her the liquor. In one fell swoop, she swallowed the shot, and then asked for another. At first, we all sat there, wordless, studying the stranger who had entered our secluded slice of civilization, but soon enough Halchin, the portly general store owner, verbalized our communal curiosity.
"Young miss,"
he said, leaning forward in his chair.
"May I inquire what brings you to our humble village? As far as I know, there are no medieval fairs planned in the near future. There is no need for swords in this part of the country."
His joke released some of the invisible tension that had festered in the pub. But when the woman turned around, the laughter ceased.
"The tall-legged beast,"
she said, her eyes as piercing as the mountain wind.
"I have no idea what you speak of,"
Halchin said, doing a poor job at masking his discomfort.
"Has anyone here heard about this tall-legged beast?"
The men shook their heads, but their eyes told a different story. We all knew what she was talking about. A week prior, the woodsman had stumbled into the pub, telling frantic stories of a long-legged beast. It attacked him and his dog in the forest. They both survived the horror, but there was something wrong with them. Within a fortnight, the dog was dead. Within a week, the woodsman was dead as well.
"Pray tell, young miss,"
Halchin said, trying to steady his voice.
"Who told you these tales of this supposed tall-legged beast? Are you sure you didn't simply hear an exaggerated story of the bear attack our village experienced a while back?"
"The stories I have heard were not of a bear attack. The stories I have heard were concerning a beast of an entirely different nature. The stories I have heard were about a creature of long limbs and eyes filled with darkness,"
she said, towering above us from the bar chair.
"I have come to rid you of this beast."
"Under whose orders?"
Halchin asked.
"My employers are not of your concern. What is of your concern is the creature that roams the forest near your village. Surely you have seen its work. Surely you understand the threat that it poses to your little community."
It was us, the men around the table that had found the woodsman's body. It was us that buried the disfigured corpse, and it was us that hid the reality of his long-limbed transformation beneath the lie of suicide. We had seen the long-legged beast's work.
"Who sent you?"
Halchin asked with a voice of pure ice.
"The beast that roams your forest is not an animal,"
she said, ignoring his question.
"The beast that roams your forest is a curse manifested. With each bite that the beast delivers, the curse spreads. While the long-legged creature continues to roam your forests, the village will suffer. I am here to put an end to the suffering."
How? I found myself asking. Halchin's brow furrowed. I had spoken out of turn. Yet my question was deemed pertinent.
"My friend Ferko makes a good point,"
Halchin said.
"Let's hypothetically say that this long-legged beast does exist. How would one of a tender nature such as yourself be able to help? Hunting, be it of cursed animals or not, is a man's..."
As soon as she put her hand on the hilt of her sword, Halchin went quiet.
"It is in your best interest to not judge my character, lest you want to see exactly how untender my nature is,"
she said. For a brief moment, it looked as if we would be witnesses to another death. But then the stranger's grip relaxed.
"I am not here to argue. I am not here to fight. I came to this pub to help rid you of the beast.
Without thinking, I found my mouth moving once more. How? I asked.
The beast is the result of a curse, and curses do not manifest out of the ether,
the stranger said, looking at me.
Once I find a person who brought the long-legged beast into this world, it will be easier to put it to rest.
With fear in my heart, my eyes drifted to my empty glass. The stranger did not look away.
Does anyone here have a guilty conscience? Has anyone here tangled with forces beyond their means?
No one spoke. I kept my eyes glued to the table. I kept my eyes away from hers. Yet I knew she was looking straight at me. I knew she knew.
No one.
She asked.
No one here has a heavy heart.
I almost spoke. I almost confessed to my sin. But Halchin opened his mouth before I could open mine.
Young miss, I apologize for offending you with my comments, but now you're offending us. We are all Christians here. We may not be saints, but we do not commune with the darkness that you speak of. The beast that roams the forest is not of our doing.
But you admit the existence of this beast,
the stranger said, her lips lingering on the edge of a smile.
I admit nothing,
Halchin said.
I am simply making conversation.
Well, if everyone here is a saint, then the presence of the beast is truly puzzling,
the stranger said, her eyes still glued to me.
Yet that doesn't change the nature of the work that needs to be done. One way or another, I will put this beast to rest. To do that, however, I will need a guide for these forests. I do not know the land this far south.
I'll go, I found myself saying.
Verko, have you lost your mind?
Halchin yelled.
You're a cripple. You have no business in the forest.
I have a horse. The man doesn't need to walk, he just needs to know the forest.
I know the forest, I said.
Then you'll do,
she said.
Now all that is left is the matter of my horse. We have ridden a long way. The animal needs to rest before the hunt. Is there a stable available?
Halchin did not look at the woman. Instead, he glared at me. For a second it looked as if he would bar me from joining the huntress, but eventually his sneer loosened.
The woodsman has a barn,
he said.
He's no longer making use of it.
I'll show you where it is, I said.
Lead the way.
Without looking back at the table, I limped out of the pub. I couldn't look the others in the eye. The walk to the woodsman's barn was long and silent. Each step that I took with my bad leg felt like a muffled bolt of lightning traveling up my spine, my bones shivering the same way they do before a thunderstorm. I moved slowly, yet she didn't complain. The huntress simply led her horse behind me and kept her eyes on the dark forest beyond the village. After we found the woodsman's body, we cleaned the barn as thoroughly as we could. For a group of drunks, we did a good job, yet on the far side of the barn, nestled into the darkness of the wood, there was still a trace of dried crimson. The huntress noticed it as soon as she entered.
I presume the man's house is vacant as well.
Yes.
Good. Did you know the woodsman well?
Yes,
I offer you my condolences then,
she said, hitching the horse.
Meet me here tomorrow at sunrise. We'll make sure the long-legged beast doesn't hurt anyone else.
With that, she retired to the dead man's cottage. I went back home to my wife. A part of me wanted to tell her. A part of me wanted to prepare her for the possibility that her husband wouldn't come back home the following day. Yet I couldn't. She knew about my transgression. She'd witnessed the birth of the long-legged beast. That was enough heartache for her. I did not sleep that night. I simply lay there, listening to her gently snore on my chest, listening to her dream. As the first rays of sun started to creep into our bedroom, I prayed that I would hear those carefree hums again. The night of my wedding, my father-in-law gave me a shotgun. When he gave me the gift, he said that every man should be able to defend his family. I didn't know how useful I would be with a weapon I'd never shot, but I took it with me regardless. With a knitted hat from my wife and a shotgun from her father, I set out to hunt the long-legged beast. The morning was unseasonably warm and humid. Instead of having frigid teeth, the air outside was heavy, and each breath I took felt sluggish. Through thick fog, I lumped my way to the woodsman's barn. When I arrived, the huntress was already bringing out the horse. Without even the slightest bit of resistance, the creature carried me. The animal didn't acknowledge me in the slightest, neither did the huntress who walked a few paces before us. The walk through the village was just as wordless as it had been a night prior. I found myself trying to make sense of the symbols carved into the hilt of the huntress's sword.
So what happened?
She asked nonchalantly as we left the village.
What did you do to be cursed?
I stole a sheep. Saying the words filled me with equal part relief and terror. Being able to confess to the sin that brought forth the long-legged beast eased my heart. Yet the absurdity of it all shook me. This was all happening because of one measly sheep. If I was able to provide for my family, I wouldn't have... Wait, I said. How did you know it was me?
Have a nose for these things. Presume you stole the sheep from someone who lives in the forest.
Yes, I said, trying to make sense of the world beyond the fog. The sheep was tied to a cottage that stood on a chicken leg. The animal chewed off the rope that held it, and I took it home.
Cottage on a chicken leg?
She asked, a hint of amusement sneaking into her voice.
Wrinkly old hag? Glass eye? Body like a sack of potatoes?
Yes, I said. Her horrid voice and her sagging face, I could see them again. She's the one who cursed me.
How are her eyebrows?
Her eyebrows?
Yeah, big and red and drawn on.
Like giant crimson birds descending on her beady eyes whenever she blinked. I remembered. Yes.
Classic Baba. Presume she asked you for your firstborn in order to forgive the theft.
No, I said. She asked for a kiss. The huntress stopped. So did the horse.
A kiss?
She asked, her voice flat with disbelief. Yes. She said she missed the company of men and would forgive the theft if I gave her a kiss. Should I have kissed her? Would that have... The huntress keeled over in laughter. She found the idea of the hag asking me for a kiss so funny that it stole away her breath.
Sorry,
she said, trying to compose herself.
just funny seeing how desperate the old girl has gotten.
To not share her sense of humor.
Don't worry.
She said, calming herself and continuing to walk.
By the end of the day, the long-legged beast will be taken care of.
Will I have to... Will I have to kiss the hag? I wasn't joking, but she burst out laughing again.
No,
she said, clearing tears out of her eyes.
No, you won't have to kiss the Baba Yaga.
Would the huntsman and his dog still be alive if I'd kissed her? The huntress's smile disappeared. Suddenly, she didn't find the hag's desperation funny.
No,
she said.
Baba is a cruel creature. If you did what she asked of you, she would find a different way to cause suffering. You simply stole a sheep from the wrong person. These things happen.
I'm not a thief. The words dropped out of my mouth without my input. Shame rushed through my body like a steel beam through flesh. I used to work construction. I used to be able to provide for my family. If it wasn't for the accident, if I could still work, I wouldn't have never even thought about stealing the animal.
You stole the sheep, but you have been punished sufficiently,
the huntress said.
After today, the long-legged beast won't hurt anyone else. I promise things will turn for the better.
The forest path was one of melting snow and mud. Out beyond the fog, I could see the silhouettes of trees, yet the rest of the world was a universe of cloudy grey. The path up to the clearing where I found the cottage was steeper than I remembered, yet both the huntress and her horse walked it with utter ease.
Is this the place?
She asked, stopping on at the edge of the clearing.
Is this the place where you stole the sheep from?
I think so. It does look familiar, but I can't see the cottage.
Baba never stays in one spot for long, but her creations do. The long-legged beast is nearby.
She unsheathed her sword and studied it. Even in the dullness of the overcast day, the weapon shimmered with sharpness.
There is only one way to break a curse,
she said, testing the blade.
You have to forgive yourself. A curse stemming from an absolved sin holds little power.
The horse suddenly took 3 quick steps forward and continued to walk. I have to forgive myself? I turned around on the saddle, hoping to face the huntress, but all that I saw around me was fog.
You are not a thief.
Her voice drifted around me.
Remember, you are not a thief, and I will take care of the rest.
I made a few desperate attempts to understand what was happening, but the huntress responded to none of my questions. It was just me and the horse, blindly walking through the fog. With the huntress gone, my mind became a crackling thunderstorm of panic. Every wet step that the horse took through the muddy clearing brought forth a new image of how the long-legged beast could maim me. Yet then, in the mess of melting snow and wet earth, I saw something that focused my mind. It ran deep into the ground and was partially filled with muddy water, yet the imprint in the mud was unmistakable. Long, flat hooves, similar to those of a deer but scores larger. Just as the woodsman described it, the night him and the dog were attacked. The tracks before me belonged to the long-legged beast. The horse was leading me straight to it. I immediately started praying, hoping that a last-minute Hail Mary might draw the attention of a loving God. The horse continued walking towards the beast born of my sin. When prayers ran out, I started to rationalize. I started to convince myself that I'd simply taken home a lost sheep, that I would not have stolen the animal if my financial situation had been different. The tracks around us grew sharper, more recent. Somewhere off in the fog, I could hear the sounds of heavy breathing. The beast was near. The horse's ears shot backwards. As calm as the creature had been the entire journey, now even he was nervous. From above us came a series of throaty, pained grunts, and then, out of the fog, emerged 2 massive, pale legs. It wasn't until the horse stopped that I realized it was shaking. Whatever shiver was going through the animal's body passed on to me. I wanted to reach out for the shotgun. I wanted to call for help. I wanted to do something to guarantee my survival, yet all I could do was just sit and stare and shake. The beast's maw descended on me like an unavoidable fever dream. The creature's neck throbbed with an unspeakable power. Chunks of hardened pus dripped out of its sickly jowls, but it was the eyes. It was the eyes that truly struck terror in my being. The long-legged beast stared at me with a look that forced any idea of religion out of my head. If the eyes are a window to the soul, then the creature that stood before me was a towering example of a spirit made of pure spite and malice. Behind those hateful beads of black rested a godless being that wanted nothing more than to see me dead. I opened my mouth to scream, but no words came out. I simply sat on the horse, slack-jawed, the images of the woodsman's long-limbed corpse shaking my soul. The creature let out another unearthly grunt, drizzling me with chunks of foul-smelling spit. I was gonna die. Or worse, I was gonna end up like the woodsman. "I'm not a thief!" I suddenly found myself yelling. "I'm not a thief, and you have no power over me!" The beast's head cocked to the side. For a split second, hatred in its eyes gave way to confusion. But that confusion soon disappeared. Soon the creature's purple tongue was caressing its yellowed teeth. Whatever forgiveness I'd pried away from the depths of my soul was useless. The curse still held. I was gonna die. With throbbing effort, the long-legged abomination craned its head backwards, preparing for the kill. From the pale curtain of fog, another throaty grunt echoed. I knew that it would be the last sound I'd ever hear. I knew that I would end up just as the woodsman did. The horrid roar rang through my ears, and I became dizzy with the anticipation of death. But then, it stopped. With a gentle flash of light somewhere off in the fog, the beast's roar came to an abrupt end. The horse stopped shaking. My muscles still shivered. For what seemed like an eternity, we stood in the clearing in complete silence. But then, the creature's head collapsed in the mud, just a meter or two next to me. Its tall limbs still stood their ground in the muddy earth, but a thickening trail of dark blood was starting to worm its way down the creature's neck. With its hateful eyes shut, the animal looked harmless, nearly comical.
Good job,
she said, emerging out of the fog. The killing blow bloodied the shine of her sword. With one swipe of a rag, she cleaned the weapon.
You can rest easy now.
Is it dead?
Does it look dead?
The fog that had plagued the morning was starting to ease. The horrid universe of fear in which I'd lived for so long was starting to dissipate. The long-legged beast still stood on its misshapen limbs, but the gaping hole at its throat soothed my nerves. It looks dead, I said, watching the blood slide down to the beast's maw.
Then logic would dictate it is probably dead.
She sheathed her sword and gave the horse a friendly tap.
Good job,
she said. I wasn't sure if she was talking to me or the horse. So it's over? I asked, still uncomfortable with the legs that stood before me.
The long-legged beast is dead. Your village is safe,
she said, smiling.
Next time you see a sheep walking through the woods, just make sure that...
Groans. Two high-pitched groans strained their way into existence from the long-legged beast. Yet the creature's horrible maw remained closed. The sounds came from the wound at the monstrosity's throat.
Shit,
she said, reaching for her weapon.
Move back.
The horse took a couple steps backward as if he understood the huntress's words. What's happening? I asked. But the huntress never answered. She didn't need to. With a series of steadily deepening groans, the wound at the beast's throat opened up. Two more heads, equally grotesque, equally hateful, squirmed their way out of the creature's body. The long-legged beast was far from dead. The huntress leapt into action, slicing at the throats of the newly born heads, yet her sword did nothing to quell the monster. Even though she moved with the grace of an armed ballet dancer, every killing blow she delivered to the abomination simply resulted in the birth of two more heads. The writhing nightmare of necks that stood before us frightened me to my core. But it wasn't until the huntress turned around that I realized how dire our situation was. The only person who I had ever witnessed to be composed about the long-legged beast was no longer calm.
We need to get out of here,
she said, her voice drenched in panic. With a couple more swings of her sword that gave birth to a quartet of new pus-filled jaws, the huntress jumped onto the horse. When she mounted the animal, her boot sent a flurry of agony through my injured leg, but there was far too much adrenaline in my blood to make the pain anything but a mere blip in my frenzied mind. The gallop of the horse was fast and true, yet it was no match for the long-legged beast. Even with the long limbs, even with the dozen chomping heads, the creature behind us was matching our speed. A minefield of deep tracks spread out in front of us. The horse was starting to stumble.
The shotgun.
The huntress yelled.
Shoot the beast with a shotgun.
With every ounce of focus that I could wring from my being, I held the weapon in my shaking hands. My fingers were numb, barely recognizing the metal of the trigger, yet when I pulled it, the shot went wide. Before I'd even had a chance to contend with my missed shot, however, another horrible sound cut through my ears. A feeling of weightlessness followed the horse's scream. I was flying through the air. Somewhere behind me, the horse had tripped on the tracks of the long-legged beast. My leg was the first part of my body to meet the ground, and the screams that left my throat completely consumed my being. For a moment, I wasn't in the Slovakian wilderness. For a brief intermission in reality, I was back at an Austrian construction site, watching a marriage of steel and bone destroy my livelihood. Yet it wasn't caring co-workers that stood above me when I regained my footing in reality. The creature towered above me was far from caring. A sea of maddened eyes descended upon me, my nose filled with the stench of death. I lay in the mud, paralyzed by fear and pain, watching the throbbing symphony of necks descend. They all beat in unison, drumming to the beat of a massive heart. With nothing left to lose, my finger wrapped around the trigger once more. The world came crashing down on me. I woke up, certain that I had died. I could see nothing, and all that I could feel was a bone-crushing pain. I had stolen a sheep from the Baba Yaga, and this was my punishment. Eternal darkness and pain. Yet as I lay in the murky depths of the afterlife, other sensations started to crawl through my perception. I could feel the cold wetness of mud against my back. I could hear the singing of far-off forest birds. My finger was still wrapped around the trigger of the shotgun. With a grunt, a gentle female grunt, sunlight entered my world. The huntress stood above me smiling.
You survived.
The body of the long-legged beast lay next to me, reeking of death and gunpowder.
It's dead, don't worry.
Are you sure? She kicked aside a clump of half-grown heads, revealing a jagged shotgun hole where the beast's heart once was.
Sure enough,
She said.
the long-legged beast will no longer harm your village. The curse has been broken. Looks like the killing blow had come from you. Let's take you back to civilization.
The sight of the unmoving monstrosity didn't even properly dawn upon me when a new problem presented itself. I couldn't get up. I couldn't feel my legs. My pants were covered in blood, and below the cloth, subtle but crushing, I could see the jagged peaks of crushed bones. It took me more than a year to learn how to walk after a steel beam went through my left leg. The injuries of the hunt were incomparable to my construction site accident. I would never walk again. I can't get up. That's all I managed to say before the tears seized my throat. When all that plagued me was one bad leg, I kept some semblance of a hope in my heart. I kept a token amount of faith that one day I would be able to be gainfully employed and provide for my family. But looking down at my mangled limbs, I knew that I would never work construction again. I knew that I would be a burden to my wife for the rest of our lives. The huntress stood and watched me weep in the mud, occasionally looking at her horse as if he could deal with the situation in her stead. But then, a light bulb went off behind her eyes. Unsheathing her sword, she made her way to the corpse of the long-legged beast. After a brief staccato of broken bones and some wet noises of guts being pushed apart, she re-emerged. In her hands she held a tight glob of green flesh. With nimble fingers she picked out chunks of buckshot out of the beast's heart.
Take off your pants.
She said. With the sorrow and agony storming through my soul, I had no energy to question or argue. Beneath the cloth, I could see shards of my own bones. I averted my tear-filled eyes and stared at the trees of the Magura Forest. At first, I felt nothing. At first, all I felt was a crushing numbness in the part of my body which was no longer my own. But slowly, ever so slowly, I felt it. Like a soft summer wind. Like the gentle wool of the sheep that I had stole. I felt feeling return to my legs.
Can you get up now?
She asked. I didn't answer. I just tried. My pants were off and my face was covered in tears, but for the first time in years I felt whole. I can walk, I said, taking a step with legs that no longer inspired charity. Each step was true. It was as if there never was a long-legged beast, as if there never was a construction site accident. I can walk, I yelled, breaking into a sprint. I can run. I can work. I can provide. Like a child, I ran laps around the corpses of the beasts that once plagued my nightmares. The huntress simply watched me, entertained by my joy. How can I repay you? I asked, when my lack of breath finally left me stationary. You've saved me. You've saved my family. I don't know how to give my thanks.
My payment has been taken care of by my employers,
she said, mounting her horse.
But that is a nice hat you're wearing.
Without question, I took off the hat and gave it to her. My wife's handiwork seemed to come from a different world than the huntress, but the woman seemed satisfied with her new hat.
I hope you don't mind walking home on your own.
Not at all.
So long then.
Wait, I said. You saved me. You saved my family. You saved the whole village, and I know nothing of you. Please, let me treat you to a drink or a meal.
I am neither hungry nor thirsty, and there is work to be done. Your thanks is good enough. Travel well, stranger, and may we never meet again.
And with that, she was gone. Even though my legs were raging with energy, I couldn't bring myself to walk home. For a while, I just stood in the muddy clearing, tapping my feet to make sure they can still move, trying to make sense of it all. The hag, the woodsman, the long-legged beast. Thinking of it all, trying to make sense of it all, it simply made me dizzy. I reminded myself of what mattered. I was alive and standing on my own 2 feet. My wife was still gently snoring at home, and there were construction jobs littered throughout Europe that I was suddenly eligible for once more. Standing there in the clearing, I realized that even though the past few years of my life had been drenched in darkness, things were looking up. I reminded myself of what mattered. And then I walked back home to start a new life.
The Long-Legged Beast of the Magura Forest was written, edited, and produced by me, Mike Jesus Langer, and has featured the voice talents of Sam Barlien, Sean Brodeur, Jen Kirk, Dr. Creepin, Grax Bishop, Lana Syntari, and Petar Buha. Featuring music from Petr Gabor and The Dark Side of Music, with cover art from Radio Merrill TV. Thank you so much for all of the support. It's a blast reading and responding to your comments. And there is a big announcement coming on Friday, so stay tuned. But for now, that's me. Hope everybody is safe, sane, and healthy out there. See you next week.